On June 25th, 2009, the world got news that just didn't seem real. Michael Jackson, the king of pop, was dead. And that single piece of news created this massive shockwave that rippled across the globe. But beyond all the grief, it kicked up a storm of questions that honestly are still being asked today. So, was it just a terrible, tragic mistake? A medical procedure that went horribly wrong? That was the official story that started taking shape pretty quickly. Or was it something more? The unavoidable end to a life lived under a kind of pressure most of us can't even imagine. A story with way more layers than a simple headline could ever capture. Okay, let's get into it. To really understand the whole mystery, we've got to go back to that day, the final tragic hours of a true global icon. So the morning of June 25th started out, well, normal for Michael Jackson at his LA home, which meant powerful sedatives to fight his chronic insomnia. But then, by early afternoon, something went terribly, terribly wrong. He stopped breathing. A frantic 911 call was made, but it was just too late. At only 50 years old, the king of pop was gone. And the reaction? I mean, it was unlike anything we'd ever seen. News channels just stopped everything, websites were crashing from all the traffic, and memorials just popped up everywhere, from Tokyo to Times Square. It was this moment of truly global shared grief for an artist who basically defined a generation. In the middle of all that grief, an investigation started immediately. The world needed answers. So, what did the authorities actually find? The coroner's report was blunt. There was no ambiguity. The cause of death was an overdose, a fatal mix of the anesthetic propofol and other sedatives. So, right away, we knew this wasn't a natural death. It was medically induced. And this is what makes the whole situation so unbelievable. Propofol. We have to be clear, this is not a sleeping pill. It's a heavy-duty surgical anesthetic. It's the stuff they use to knock you out for major surgery in a hospital. The idea that it was being used in a private home, well, to any doctor, that is just absolutely shocking. So the investigation pretty quickly focused on his personal doctor, Conrad Murray, who had given him the drugs. He was charged with involuntary manslaughter, and in 2011, a jury found him guilty. The court's final word was crystal clear. Michael Jackson's death was a homicide, caused by gross medical negligence. But here's the thing. A guilty verdict didn't make the questions go away. To really get why this happened, we have to zoom out and look at the life Michael Jackson was living. It was the life of just constant, crushing pressure. Michael Jackson basically lived in two completely different worlds. On one side, you have the public icon, the absolute genius behind Thriller, the guy who invented the moonwalk. But on the other side, that was the private reality, a man constantly under a microscope, hounded by the media, tangled in legal battles, and dealing with chronic health problems that led to a serious dependence on medication. And that pressure was peaking in 2009. He was in the middle of preparing for This Is It, this massive comeback tour of 50 shows in London. By all accounts, he was completely exhausted, suffering from terrible insomnia, and just desperate for some sleep so he could keep up with the grueling rehearsals. And that brings us to how the public saw things. For a lot of fans, the story of just one bad doctor, well, it didn't feel like the whole picture. It felt more like the final tragic act in a much longer, darker play. So, that's the big question, right? If the case was legally closed, why did all these theories and controversies just keep swirling? The answer, I think, lies in the massive scale of his life and this feeling that there had to be more powerful forces at work. All those doubts basically boiled down to a few main theories. First, you've got the official verdict: tragic medical negligence. Simple as that. Second is the idea that Jackson's own long-term dependency on medication was the real root cause. Then you get into the conspiracy theories that the This Is It tour was so huge financially that maybe his health was pushed aside for profit. And then, of course, you have the wildest theory of all, that he faked his own death to escape everything. But look, no matter how complicated his death was, one thing is absolutely undeniable: the monumental legacy he left behind. He wasn't just a singer. He was a cultural force. He basically invented the modern music video, turning them into these huge cinematic events. An album like Thriller, it shattered records that still haven't been broken. His music, his style, it all continues to inspire artists today. His mark on pop culture is permanent. So what's the big takeaway here? Officially, the case is closed. Michael Jackson died from a medical overdose given to him by his doctor. But the full story, the real story, is about a man who climbed to the highest peak of fame imaginable, only to become a prisoner of it. In the end, his death is this massive cautionary tale about fame, pressure, and the struggles that can hide behind even the brightest spotlights. The King of Pop is gone, but the conversation about his life and his death is far, far from over.